What's happening, people? Back with another reaction, back with some more Ultravox, and we're jumping ahead to what I think is the next proper album, Lament, 1984. There were two more bonus tunes in the expanded folder for Quartet, which I think were Break Your Back and Overlook, so if either of those bonus tunes are worth going back for, do let me know. And then I jumped past Monument, the soundtrack album, because when I looked inside it, I feel like I've reacted to every tune in there. Again, if there's one or two that I didn't actually react to, let me know, we can go back. But there were a couple folks who mentioned that some of the bonus tunes, they weren't quite on the level of their regular album tracks, so I'm down to go to the next album. Though once again, whether Phil or anyone else, just let me know and we can circle back and hit the tracks I've skipped over. But I figure it wouldn't be a bad thing to get to the next album proper. And the first track on Lament is White China. So I'm thinking China here is a reference to the fine tableware, I don't know exactly what the correct term is, but precious plates and cups and dishes that are referred to in the West as China, because many of them, I think, come from China, or it's a type of, porcelain? I forget exactly the material, but yes, it's what is often used in Western countries as a name for fine tableware. But of course it could be a reference to China, and maybe white China contrasting it with red China, in the same way that white Russians relative to red Russians refers to the Civil War / politico and economic affiliations that are related to communist and royalist or czarist. So yeah, I don't know if that is actually used in the same way in regard to, let's say, late 19th, early 20th century Chinese history, which I feel like the timeline for that is a bit forward in time for Chinese history. But yes, my expectation is that this relates to fine tableware, but of course I could be wrong. I'll try to catch what I can on a first listen, and I will stop talking now. This is Ultravox, the track is White China, and it's the first tune from their 1984 album, Lament. Oh, one moment. I believe that is the speaker system of mine, not a glitch in the track, so let me start that again. To repeat, this is Ultravox, and the track is White China. Hey. Almost like a vocal synth bass line.
Lights go down on all you've ever known.
what an opener. Sonically, very busy, dynamic sonics, different keyboard lines, some very high and celestial, some very melodic and grooving. Then there's that deep, rumbling synth bass, which in some cases had that like vocal synth layer doubling it, which I very much enjoyed. Obviously, those percussive flourishes and rapid fire flare-ups right as the measure changes. So yes, a very engaging and energetic and dynamic sonic character to this track. Lyrically, I feel like it actually was about the PRC and what became the ROC, which is to say white nationalist China that was eventually defeated by the red, what would become the People's Republic of China, the communist forces, and thus white China receding to or retreating to what we call Taiwan and becoming the Republic of China, which, you know, there's a long, complicated history of that. I have studied that to a certain extent in, you know, my historical studies in university and grad school, because I took a couple history of China courses. I just never heard it referred to as White China, but yes, I guess we're referring to Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang, which then again became the government in Taiwan right up into the present, and that's again a whole can of worms. I will just say, if I'm reading the lyrics correctly, it takes a dim view toward the PRC, the People's Republic of China, the, you know, communist China, which I think it was 49, the year the Civil War was won by Mao Zedong and other, I forget what the original term for them was, but the people who took the Long March, or the Long Campaign, which were like the original communist forces that became the PRC government. And ultimately, I don't think it's incorrect to say that, especially if you had any association to white China, you were then, you know, your life was not your own, your town was not your own, and freedoms that you had known were then taken away. And of course, you know, there's another perspective from the other side that the PRC were fighting for a larger swath of peoples than had privileged status under nationalist China. But again, I don't think it's inaccurate to say that Red China would then become very repressive when it comes to freedom of political speech, and, you know, if you were considered in the higher socioeconomic rungs, you would have your properties and your livelihoods taken away from you. I will say, if you're interested in all this history, you should watch a film. I forget the name. No, it's To Live. The film is To Live, and it was ultimately banned by, I think it was like in the early 90s, the PRC government, because they have a, you know, like a, what's the right word? Not like a film bureau that vets films to see if they're appropriate to be shown in the PRC or not, but it eventually got, I think, some significant success and interest outside of China. I watched it for a film class I took, and indeed, I think it was one of those Chinese history classes. So that's the way I'm reading the lyrics. They're general enough that I suppose you could extrapolate them to larger context, but I'm guessing that is the essence of the themes at play here. But I enjoyed the vocals. They weren't super big and expressive, but they had a charisma to them and a deeper register type of sound. So yeah, I don't know if I've heard Midge sing precisely as he did here, but a really compelling opener. Curious to hear what else might be on hand. I suppose, thinking about the album title Lament, it sounds like this is a lament by those who would have been affiliated by White China, and those who, you know, maybe not overtly were associated with the Kuomintang and them retreating to Taiwan, but who may have held sympathies that are not in favor of what then became the political authorities of the PRC, and thus they would have lamented the way the Chinese Civil War played out. So we'll see if that is a continuing theme. Either way, a really compelling opener. Once again, shout out to Phil for providing the larger Ultravox catalog. Let me know what you think. I will see you next time. Peace.